Here's another installment of what it's like to go to war. And on this special D-Day version, I want to talk about the weather. You see, planners will spend weeks, sometimes months. Did you know that even preparing for Operation Overlord, what we know as D-Day, the single largest invasion in human history, there were years of work, quite literally, years of work that goes into planning. You do everything you can as a leader on the ground to take every possible factor into consideration. You consider the terrain, you consider the enemy, you look at the mission, you look at what's happening with the troops available, you look at all of the conditions around you, even the civilian population. But there's one wild card factor that no one can account for. It's the weather. I've been on combat operations where things turned from bad to terrible overnight because of the weather. Did you know that D-Day was actually planned for June 5th, 1944? But the weather got so bad that it looked like there was no way to pull this invasion off anytime soon because of this highly unpredictable weather patterns in the English Channel. In fact, the historians tell very clearly about the planning on the night of June 4th when the weather team said to Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, the guy who was kind of responsible for the decision to launch the largest invasion in human history, the weather meteorologist said, it doesn't look good. Not now, not anytime soon. So they planned, they prepared, they were all ready to go on June 5th, and then the weather rolled in and there was no way that they could launch the invasion. And so the team met together again, and on the night of June 5th, the meteorologist said to Dwight D. Eisenhower, there is a very small chance that there'll be a window where the weather cooperates tomorrow morning, June 6, 1944. And if that window doesn't happen, then we're not going to be able to do the weather's not going to cooperate with us anytime soon. And Dwight D. Eisenhower made this famous phrase recorded in history books. He looked at the team, years of work planning, and no way to control the weather. And he said those famous words, okay, tomorrow we go. Basically, we're going to give it everything that we've got, but no one can control the weather. And I regularly had to remind myself of this in combat. In fact, I'm going to give you a statement that I want you to tuck away in the back of your head if you're in the military. You can fight the enemy. You can fight the terrain. You can fight against the equipment and the troops and everything else that you have out there. But the one thing that you cannot fight against, no one can win this fight, is the weather. I still remind myself this when I'm working in the backyard and the weather doesn't cooperate with me. I will sometimes say out loud to myself, you can't fight the weather. Nobody wins that fight. I'll give you a recent example. I was in Afghanistan in the global war on terrorism with all of the technology, all of the advancements of the United States military, quite literally the most advanced fighting force in human history. And I flew out to see some of our guys on a hillside at about 14,000 feet or at about 10,000 feet. And while I was out there, I planned to stay only about a night and then get on a helicopter and fly the next day. So I just took the stuff that's on my back. I flew out to this fire base way up in the mountains of Afghanistan. And when I got in that night and started meeting with our guys, a weather pattern moved in. Listen to this, a weather pattern that sat over that mountain range, and for the next 2 weeks, it dumped snow on those mountains. Literally, you couldn't drive through the mountain passes because the roads were so treacherous. You couldn't fly helicopters because you couldn't see where the white snow-capped mountains end and where the clouds begin. So you couldn't even tell, even with our sophisticated radar, if you were about to fly into a mountain, you couldn't even see the ground from our satellite photos. It was an entire blackout for 2 weeks. I brought just enough clothes with me to stay for one night. And I was stuck up on that mountain for 2 weeks because you can't fight the weather. And if you fight the weather, you can't win. So one of the factors that I want you to always keep in the back of your mind as a warrior preparing to go to combat is you do everything you can. You always plan to the best of your abilities. But there's one thing that you cannot factor in, and that's what happens with the weather. If it wasn't for that fog that rolled in the English Channel, maybe the entire British invasion force would have been annihilated at Dunkirk. But the reason why they were able to get off those beaches is because of that fog, not just because of Churchill's ad hoc navy. And the weather cooperated. Sometimes the weather's going to cooperate, sometimes it's not, but you can't fight the weather. And I just wanted to do this special D-Day version of what it's like to go to war to remind you, before you ever step foot in a combat zone, you can fight a whole lot of things about this battle, but you cannot fight the weather. So you just figure out how to roll with it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. God bless.